In the last podcast on codependency, I talked about resentment. And one of the things I mentioned is resentment around boundaries. Boundaries to a codependent feel so wrong and are so hard to establish. So that's what I want to talk about on this month-long series about codependency. Welcome back to the Secure Husband Podcast. Bruce Abbott, certified professional coach, founder of securehusband.com. I always have to say right up front whenever I'm talking about boundaries, because a lot of people go right to this idea that boundaries are selfish and controlling. They're ultimatums. They are not. A boundary is not punishment or a threat or using it to manipulate. But what a boundary from a secure perspective is not about controlling another person. It is about stopping abandonment of yourself. Because I tell you, if there's one thing I've learned from my own journey and from coaching men over the years, codependent men struggle with boundaries more than almost any other person. Boundaries trigger the deepest fears we have inside, and insecurities and shame. But it's fear of rejection, fear of conflict, that fear of disappointing someone, being selfish, being called narcissistic. You fear being the bad guy. Because for many men, we don't want to be the bad guy. We can't have somebody not like us, not think we're great. And because of that fear, boundaries don't feel empowering. They're scary. They feel terrifying. Because if you don't understand the relationship between codependency and boundaries, you're going to continue sacrificing yourself and wondering why you keep becoming increasingly resentful. That's why I talked about that resentment last time. I got to a point where I'm like, I don't even think I've ever set a boundary. That's ridiculous. I mean, you laugh, and maybe I am exaggerating a little bit, but when I say that, I don't think I was exaggerating. Now, I've gotten much better as I've become secure, much better about establishing boundaries, but I didn't do that for the longest time. And when I did that, I was noticing a pattern as I looked back. Like if my wife wanted something, I always said yes, no matter what. Even if that something was basically to avoid me. If my kids wanted something, yes. Boss wants something, yes. Friends need something, yes. Yes, yes, yes. I think about the Oprah show. You get a yes, and you get a yes, and you get a yes. Everybody gets a yes. You know who didn't get a yes? Me. When I thought about what do I want, I didn't have a really good idea. I sort of knew, but I genuinely didn't really know. But I had spent decades trying to become whatever everyone else needed me to be. And what happened? Resentment. I felt exhausted. I felt lonely, disconnected. And it's not because I lacked love. I could love, and I did feel loved, but I lacked boundaries. Codependent men fear boundaries. I did. See, at the heart of codependency, remember, is this idea, I'm not okay if you're not okay? If people are unhappy with me, I'm not safe. See, at one point, as a child, there was probably something that was true about that. If you had a parent who had a temper or was very inconsistent with emotional attunement, that's not safe. That's actually little t traumas. We have big T traumas and little t traumas. Those are little t traumas. Now, sometimes those situations are big T traumas, and you have physical abuse, sexual abuse. But somewhere as a child, you learned that if this person is unhappy with me, I'm not safe. So therefore, if all people are unhappy with me, I'm not safe. And so that starts to sink in to your core. And once you believe that, boundaries become scary. They become threatening because a boundary might disappoint someone. A boundary might frustrate someone. It might cause conflict. It might make someone angry. If your nervous system believes that anger equals danger because that's what you grew up believing, you're going to avoid boundaries at all costs. I think about myself, but I think about like the guys that I work with. Codependent men are not afraid of boundaries themselves, but they're afraid of the reaction that boundaries might create in a situation. And again, you learned that. You didn't become this way in adulthood. You learned it somewhere along the way. You learned that you have to keep the peace. Don't upset people. Be easy, be accommodating, don't create problems. Those lessons became survival strategies. Maybe conflict felt dangerous growing up. So if emotional needs are dismissed, maybe if you got an unpredictable parent, love felt conditional. That's why I talk about in the Secure Husband process, connecting to that divine guidance, God, the universe, higher power, spirit, whatever your belief system, to understand what unconditional love looks like and feels like. But maybe you never got that. Love felt conditional. People-pleasing and being agreeable feels safer than being authentic and honest. And your nervous system adapted to that, and that became your survival strategy. So now here we are, decades later, saying no feels like a threat. And that's part of codependency. When you can't set boundaries, people can't respect boundaries that you never set and communicate. But so many codependent men expect others to just magically know. That's how I was. If I didn't speak up, how is somebody going to know what my boundary is? It's because I was so conflict avoidant. And boundaries, we were conditioned to believe that boundaries are selfish, that if I prioritize myself in any way, I'm selfish. But a healthy boundary is not selfish. A healthy boundary is basically, my needs matter as well as yours. My feelings matter just as much as anybody else's. My time, my energy, my limits, my well-being. Remember, codependency teaches that everyone else's matters first. But boundaries teach you that everyone matters, including you, especially you. That's the difference between boundaries and control. And I did the whole series on boundaries. Guys confuse boundaries with control all the time. See, control says you, wife, or whoever, need to change. Boundaries say, this is what I'm willing to do. A boundary, you're focusing on yourself. Control is when you're focusing on the other person and you're trying to change that person. That's why I always use the example of if you've got a spouse who's yelling at you. So trying to control them is you need to stop yelling. No, a boundary is if yelling continues, I'm stepping away from this conversation and we can continue it later when yelling is not involved. Has nothing to do with the other person. It's what I am willing to tolerate and what I am going to do about it. And that's what the difference I was trying to get across in that podcast series on boundaries. Controlling, you're trying to manage that other person. With boundaries, well, you're managing yourself. But boundaries are threatening to a codependent. And it's because we have that emotional attachment. Our emotions are defined by their emotions, and their emotions control my emotions. Their happiness becomes my responsibility, and their disappointment becomes something that's emergent for me to take care of and fix right away. Boundaries now separates those things. Now that can feel terrifying because suddenly you have to sit in the discomfort. You have to tolerate something that many codependent people avoid, and that is other people's discomfort. That's why I always say nervous system regulation, being able to self-soothe, be able to sit in the discomfort and just be present in it. Because when you do that, you teach yourself that, hey, I can be okay with other people being upset. That's a huge lesson to learn in healing codependency. People are allowed to be disappointed. They're allowed to be frustrated. They're allowed to disagree. They can be unhappy. And guess what? You're still okay. We spend our entire lives as codependents trying to prevent discomfort in others. And that is an impossible task. And it's exhausting. And it fuels resentment. Think about the dead bedroom. I always have to throw dead bedroom in here because everybody's like, talk about dead bedroom and sexless marriages. Many men in dead bedrooms have no idea what boundaries actually look like because they're either pursuing or withdrawing. Neither's a boundary. I talked about this in the Sexless Marriage podcast series. A boundary is, babe, I deeply want intimacy in my marriage. Babe, I need mutual affection in a marriage. Babe, I want us to work on this together. I can't force you, but I can't pretend that this doesn't matter to me. This is important to me. Do you see how none of that is controlling? All of that is you expressing what you're willing to accept in a marriage. See how secure that sounds? There's no threat. There's no pressure. It's just clarity, calm, clear, grounded. And I get it. If you've got an avoidant partner, when you finally establish boundaries, your spouse is going to react negatively, make you feel that the boundary is wrong. It's bad. Shame on you, husband. Shame. No. They're triggered because the system's changing, especially if a relationship is operated on you over-functioning for years. Healthy boundaries are going to feel disruptive. People become accustomed to your self-abandonment. And when you stop doing it, it's their job to adjust to it. It's not your responsibility. Codependent is going to try to make it their responsibility to make sure the other person is not feeling upset over it. No, when you're secure and you stop self-abandoning, it's up to them to adjust. That's how the dynamic in marriages change. That's how the adjustment can start to bring down walls, because emotional safety and trust happen. And in those relationships that do come to an end, it just reveals something, maybe toxic, maybe not, but it reveals something very unhealthy about the future of the marriage. You learn to say no, or you learn to set boundaries and have your nervous system okay with their reaction. I remember saying no. I used to physically feel it. Like if I had to tell somebody no, my chest would tighten. My anxiety would just whew, and it was just like, I told somebody no. Because remember, your nervous system, boundaries are dangerous. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Ignoring completely about what's healthy for you in your relationship. Your nervous system does one job, keep you alive. But as I started to realize that, and I was able to soothe my nervous system, and I was able to realize that, hey, you know what? When I say no, nobody died. Nobody left me. And the world didn't come to an end because I said no. Oftentimes when I would say no, expecting this blowback, many times it was like, oh, okay. And over time, your nervous system will gradually learn that, hey, I can survive conflict. It doesn't kill me. I can survive disappointment. I can survive disapproval. Boundaries protect love, self-love. It may sound a little awkward, but boundaries are good for relationships. They don't hurt relationships. They are healthy in relationships. A lack of boundaries hurts relationships. Because again, the self-abandonment will eventually create resentment, and that destroys the connection. But boundaries protect against resentment. And that's how they keep relationships authentic and honest and sustainable. Because when you don't do that, you become a caretaker, an emotional caretaker. So you're always trying to monitor your partner's moods and her feelings and manage her discomfort and fix her problems and soothe everyone else. That feels loving. It's fear disguised as love. Underneath it is that belief, again, if everyone is okay, I'm okay. And if you're not okay, I'm not okay. Boundaries interrupt that cycle. So let's look at it through the secure husband process. Just notice first, what am I feeling? What do I need? Where am I abandoning myself? What am I afraid of? What's the worst that can happen? What loving action can I take? Loving for me, loving for the relationship. Very often that loving action, where you talk to the inner child inside, soothe that nervous system, soothe that inner child, contacted that divine guidance. What is my next loving action? Learning that through prayer, through meditation, journaling, whatever. Often that loving action is a boundary. Not because you're trying to punish somebody, but you're honoring yourself and you're not self-abandoning because you've set a boundary. And I get it. It's hard. If your wife's mood controls everything, if she's happy, you're happy. If she's upset, you're anxious. When you can get to a place where it's like, okay, what if her mood, that's her problem? Ooh, that sounds sticky. But that question, that's something that, especially if I started to ask myself, because remember, boundaries aren't always external. A lot of them are internal. Look, her feelings are hers, but my feelings are mine. And that's a boundary. I'm going to deal with my feelings. I'm not going to deal with her feelings. I know that sounds selfish, but remember the dismissive avoidant wife. She manages her own emotions, her own needs, and expects you to be able to do the same. Because when you can't, that's triggering to her. So when you do manage your own feelings by setting that boundary, you see how that's actually fostering connection with a dismissive. Because as codependents, we carry responsibilities emotionally that are not ours to carry. We cannot manage everyone's happiness. We cannot prevent conflict. We cannot fix every problem and make everyone feel comfortable. No. You ask, is this really my responsibility? Many times the answer is no. You are not going to be able to heal codependency without boundaries. It's impossible because codependency is fundamentally about losing yourself and self-abandonment. Boundaries are pretty much about stopping the self-abandonment and stopping the losing of yourself. A healthy boundary says, I matter, my needs count just as much as anybody else. And it comes from security. When you can overcome the codependency, overcome the insecurities, you set boundaries that are calm and clear, direct, they're respectful, they're not demanding. You wife, you better, you always. If you don't, no. A secure, calm, grounded boundary is, this doesn't work for me. This works for me. I'm willing to do this. I'm not willing to do that. Simple, clear, and grounded. That was where my healing journey really took off, when I was able to soothe my nervous system and those anxieties so that I was able to actually just look at what I was doing. And I realized, okay, I don't have to earn this right to have needs. And that's where healing begins. You don't have to earn the right to matter or take up space, to just freaking exist. No, you already have those rights. That is your inherent sense of self-worth. That's why I talk about that divine guidance, to be able to understand unconditional love, because we do not unconditionally love ourselves. If we did, we wouldn't self-abandon. So it's unconditional love for ourselves and an inherent sense of self-worth. And that will allow you to set those boundaries. You don't have to be aggressive with him. A secure husband's not controlling. He's connected to his needs, to his truth, to his values. He's not codependent. He's not avoidant. He's not passive-aggressive or aggressive. He's just connected. He no longer needs to abandon himself for love, because he can love himself so much that he has overflow. And when he can do that, he's able to set boundaries as needed. Because I get it. I mean, I spent decades believing that boundaries were selfish. Put everyone else first. I mean, as I get older and I go down this journey, it becomes really obvious looking back how much I confused self-abandonment with love. But when you realize that a boundary is not punishment, it's just what you are okay with. This is what I need to do or stop doing to stop self-abandoning. And it doesn't mean you love your wife any less. It just means you love yourself enough that you're no longer going to put up with things that fuel resentment. So I hope you're enjoying this month-long series on codependency, boundaries and codependency. I mean, it's a very interesting conversation. And as you start to become more secure, you start to learn how to establish these boundaries even better. And I do encourage you, go back and listen to that month-long podcast series on boundaries. And subscribe to this podcast if you don't already. Share it with someone who you think may need to hear this. Go give it a review if you're a regular listener on whatever platform you listen. And I encourage you visit securehusband.com/resources for those low-cost, self-guided courses, an alternative to the one-on-one coaching if that's not feasible for you right now. And if one-on-one coaching is something that you're interested in, go to securehusband.com, fill out that form, free 30-minute consultation, just a conversation with me. We talk about your situation, I tell you a little bit about coaching, and we see if it's right for you. I'll see you on the next Secure Husband podcast. Thanks for listening.